Chapter 5 Castaways Reassigned. We have seen how intensely our unborn children love us and speak to us. Each child expresses in his or her own way the same plea as Nick Cannon's song, Can I Live? All children want above all to be born and fulfill their divinely assigned missions. Their choice is to live, but sometimes their plan A is ended before it could begin. Landon's vivid memories of his other mommy, Chapter 1, indicate a plan B may be possible for some. Amazingly, it seems Landon is not alone in being given the option of a second chance, which we will see in this chapter. I have come to believe that some children who are aborted are returning to be witnesses of the sorrow abortion brings, speaking with voices we never imagined we would hear. As this manuscript was being prepared for print, I received the truly extraordinary account that follows. This story astonished even me. Alyssa, I know you.
This story is sacred to me, and I share it only because I feel impressed that part of the reason I was told these things about my son is so that I can help others in a position to affect these children's lives. It took almost 2 years to get pregnant with my first child, which was a surprisingly heart-wrenching experience for me. During that time, my husband and I felt impressed to move to Thailand, even though neither of us had any connections whatsoever to Asia. We were looking at graduate programs in international fields, however, so we figured Thailand was as good a place as any to get the required experience before applying. We found an internship program through a university that placed us with a host family and planned to live with them for 4 months before finding a more permanent home once we had more connections and language skills. Our host parents immediately adopted us as their American children, and our relationship was in many ways very traditional, which was an amazing experience. Our family was Buddhist, and our host mom in particular was extremely devout in her morning and evening meditation rituals. She taught us how to meditate, and we regularly joined her in the evening. Before too much time had passed, she shared with us a story after meditating one night that I was sure I must have misunderstood, a likely scenario considering we'd been speaking Thai for about a month at this point because of how personal it was. Multiple retellings over the next few months confirmed the details. She told us that about 15 years earlier, when her 2 daughters were in grade school, she'd accidentally gotten pregnant and gotten an abortion without telling anyone. Abortion is not an issue at all in Thailand. I never met anyone with serious moral opposition to it, so she didn't think twice about the procedure. That night, a little boy came to her, crying and asking why she had cut him out of her when he so wanted to be in her family. She felt terrible and told him she'd had no idea he wanted to join her family specifically and apologized profusely, but didn't know what else to do. When she told her husband, he was devastated, and this event in many ways destroyed their marriage, which was and is heartbreaking to me. The reason she told me this story is that she had talked again to this little boy and asked him if he'd be interested in joining a different family, referring to my husband and me. She explained to him that we had been unable to get pregnant and that we desperately wanted to start a family, and she thought we were good people that would be good parents to him. He agreed, apparently, and she informed us that I would get pregnant soon. First, we would have a daughter, because my host mom could see a little girl that followed me everywhere and had come with me from America, but then the little boy would come. Obviously, I knew she was crazy, but I was touched that she thought highly enough of us that she would offer her son to us. When I continued in my infertile status, I would rib her a little here and there, asking her where my baby was. She'd calmly reply that the girl was nervous, so she and the boy were negotiating, because he was getting too excited to wait and they'd work it out eventually. I did get pregnant within the year, and I knew immediately that it was a girl. When I shared the news with my host mom, she matter-of-factly corrected me, "No, it's the boy." The girl was too nervous, so he agreed to go first. Now I really knew she was crazy, because I had felt the presence of my daughter, Imagine my surprise when an ultrasound confirmed that I was indeed carrying a boy. My pregnancy turned out to be a tumultuous affair, with preterm labor symptoms starting at 18 weeks. While I was in and out of bed rest, my husband had an accident and cut off his thumb, and our combined difficulties plus visa issues required us to return to the United States when I was almost 7 months pregnant. It calmed my heavy anxiety somewhat to be in a familiar place with family and doctors I could communicate with in my native tongue, but it was still an emotionally and physically grueling final trimester for me. Despite my fears and pains, however, I consistently took comfort in the fact that for some reason I felt a very strong bond with my son. I frequently felt his emotions and could communicate with him easily. When doctors were worried because my extremely active baby hadn't moved in days, I would tell him to kick, so I'd know he was still alive. And he'd immediately kick, kick, kick my belly, etc. It was bizarre and wonderful to have that comfort from him. The birth was long and difficult, and in many ways not the experience I'd hoped for. But in the moment when he was born, I was completely floored by the wave of uncontrollable emotion that washed over me. I looked in his eyes as they carried him away to some ghastly pumping machine, and I could almost hear his spirit saying, "I know you." And without even meaning to, I responded out loud, "I know you." It was a profoundly sacred moment that shocked me. It changed me as a person and gave me deep reserves of perspective as a new mother. I was completely in love with my baby, so much so that many people commented in the first 6 months that they'd never seen anyone so obsessed with their offspring. This was a good thing, because my darling baby happened to be a handful. Both in the womb and in the fresh air, this boy needed to move, and I've yet to encounter a more twitchy, noisy baby. He ate constantly, but was never satisfied. He cried or whined much of the day and night, and he hated to be left alone for any reason. Luckily, all I wanted to do was sit and stare at him, and this seemed like no sacrifice most of the time. I did not think of him as a hard baby at the time, but I knew he required more TLC than some babies I had been around before. The one thing I knew was a problem, however, was the night terrors. I researched them like crazy after he had his first on the second night home from the hospital, and everything I read said it was impossible for babies under 3 to have them. He met every requirement, however, and he had them at least twice a week for over a year. There were many weeks when he'd have night terrors every night, sometimes more than 3 in a night. They were horrible to listen to and watch, and we couldn't wake him or help him in any way, which just about undid my husband and me. My research told me nothing other than I should ignore them and let him scream, seeing as nothing could be done. My prayers, on the other hand, left me dismayed by the very specific and insistent direction that I never, 1, force him in anything ever, or 2, let this infant cry alone. There were times when, in complete exhaustion and frustration, I would try to set him in his crib so I could walk out and plug my ears for 5 minutes, and I would feel a physical presence stopping me, reminding me that this baby could not handle the feelings of abandonment my actions would cause. Thankfully, I would also be given a new strength to take my poor boy into my arms and let him scream into my chest yet again, and I never did leave him alone, even though it seemed extreme to me. One day when my son was about 15 months old, a strong impression entered my mind. Ty Mom isn't crazy, and you need to listen to what she told you, and you need to help your son heal. I tried to push away the crazy thought, but it was persistent. As I gradually accepted the possibility, I was given assurance that as I had faith, I would be guided to solutions for my son's difficulties. This was a strange reality to come to terms with, as I'd never heard of aborted spirits coming back to new bodies, and I didn't know how to believe it. As I prayed about it, though, I felt peace slowly settle in my heart and a confirmation that this was true. Within a week, as my son was having another night terror, I felt prompted that these episodes were the result of abortion trauma and resulting vulnerabilities. After praying yet again, I was given specific instructions about how to help his mind and body heal, which I followed. He slept peacefully through the rest of the night. The next night, it happened again. Again, I followed the instructions I was given, and after that instance, he has never had another night terror. Not only have his terrors stopped, but in the past 2 years, he has also grown into a very sweet and emotionally healthy boy, and he is an excellent and loving brother to his baby sister, who finally decided she was ready. But that's another story. Every once in a while, over the months that followed the final night terror, I'd be given an impression about some aspect of parenting or other action I could take to facilitate further healing. And as I followed those promptings, I watched so many of his struggles disappear. I have been filled with gratitude for the heavenly guidance I've received, including the stories I have since discovered of the many other people who have had similar experiences with their own children. I am grateful to a God who gives us these children and allows us to witness their healing. These spirits are incredibly powerful and have strong desires to experience mortality, and their lives are sacred. I hope that in sharing our story, I can be a witness and help to others.
Suzanne, rejected by those who should have cared. I first met Suzanne when she phoned me out of the blue one afternoon. She had been given a copy of the Castaways by a friend who had acquired it at a conference. Suzanne introduced herself and said, "Well, you have it right. I have been to the other side in a near-death experience, and I have seen the aborted ones. They still live, and many of them are very sorrowful because they were rejected by those who should have cared for and protected them." She proceeded to share with me her near-death experience, which occurred when she hemorrhaged right before surgery to remove an ectopic pregnancy. Her experience is also recorded in her book, Led by the Hand of Christ.
Christ took me back to the gardens of heaven, and I sensed that it was nearing time for me to return to earth. While I had every intention of going back, my heart broke at the very thought of it. Not only would I miss all the beauty in heaven, but I would have to return to the body suffering from a painful miscarriage. More agonizing than that would be my empty arms with no baby to hold. I've always had an early emotional attachment to my unborn babies, feeling a sense of unbounded joy when I first found out I was carrying them, wondering what it would be like, what they would look like, eagerly anticipating their arrival. I had already felt that this baby was a very real part of our family, and now she would be gone. I didn't know how I would bear the loss. A calming presence moved into my circle of awareness. I looked up from my dreary thoughts to see Jesus' earthly mother, Mary, standing in front of me. Dark hair framed her lovely face, and her blue eyes regarded me with such compassion that tears stung my eyes. She put her arms out and embraced me in a soft, comforting layer of empathy. She knew the pain of losing a child. She took my hand and walked me along a pathway to a pretty white gazebo with delicate woodwork. Lowering herself onto a bench, she patted the seat beside her. I sat down. The spirit of my little daughter, who'd been my ectopic pregnancy, joined us. She had tagged along during most of my journey through heaven. I called her Brooke, since I'd always wanted a daughter so named. "It is such a noble thing to be a mother," Mary said, her liquid blue eyes filled with empathy. "I understand your pain." There was no question that she did. I cried again. Brooke noticed and skipped over to give me a brief hug before returning to her play. Mary pondered. "There is this place. Wait here." Brooke dashed into the gazebo and sat in Mary's place. She gazed at me with a twinkle in her eye. She was a beautiful child, for whom I already felt great love. She looked like a mix of the features of all three of my girls. I couldn't help but ask, "Do you want to come back?" Brooke shook her head. "I have to stay." She patted my hand. Mary returned, accompanied by a man named Hiram. He spoke, his eyes alight with joy. "I know the perfect one for you." "The perfect one what?" He pulled me to my feet, and as we walked, he and Mary explained the plan for reassigned children, those whose agency was taken away by abortion. The reassigned children's area is one of the most beautiful in heaven, with terraced landscaping on 3 different levels, and interlaced gardens of unimaginable variety and beauty. I learned that for many it is a favorite site in all of heaven. Even Jesus likes to go there and be with the children. He loved them on earth. Why not in heaven? The children range in age from toddlers to preteens. Many appear to have been healed of their abortion trauma and are pure, full of love, never fight or quarrel. On top of a small hill with soft grass that whispers an invitation to roll down, there is a playground with everything a child would love: swings, slides, merry-go-rounds, monkey bars, everything. Suddenly, the children's attention turned, and they ran to a tall figure in a white robe. It was Jesus. They obviously knew him. With a broad smile, he invited the children to run after him in a tag-like game, running just fast enough so they could catch him. How joyous their squeals and laughter. It was part of their healing. Sadness enters the reassigned children's area when the spirit of another aborted child arrives. Many deceased school teachers choose to go there and help the children because their love of teaching goes with them into the next world. This is a blessing of heaven. You do what you're good at and what you loved on earth. In addition to an environment of unconditional love and safety, these rejected little souls are healed by hope as they are taught about the new family to which they are reassigned. I noticed a light-haired little boy playing in the flowers. When he saw Hiram, he ran and jumped into his arms. "This is the boy. You'd better be a good mother for him." I was grateful for heavenly help in choosing a child, for they were all so loving and radiant. When the little boy and I embraced, all the other reassigned children cheered. There was not even a shred of jealousy or whining. No, why him? Why not me? They expressed only happiness for the child who would now have a chance to experience Earth life. Before leaving the reassigned children's area, I was able to see one child actually leave for his new earthly home. It was quite a send-off, with more heartfelt cheering and goodwill. As I reflected on the fate of those remaining, I saw two children sitting on a park bench. A little boy with dusty blonde hair was crying, and a little girl with curly blonde hair and a cute white dress was comforting him. Although she too was sad, she seemed more concerned about his needs than her own. I walked over and inquired, "Why are you crying?" "My mom did not want me." It melted my heart. I have never seen children cry so. I said, "Oh, don't cry. You can be my children." Quickly, I glanced at Jesus with an, "Oops, I probably should not have said that." He flashed a huge smile and I nodded. Of course. The children jumped up and hugged me. "Thank you. Thank you." Reassured, they ran off to play. I was shown that parents on Earth get their priorities mixed up and put off having children for career advancement, or to have a bigger house, or for some other reason. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, but they are temporary, and eternal relationships are more important. And then there are childless couples to whom children are not sent. It is part of their test, and it will be made up to them, and they will eventually receive children. Some people are meant to get their children through adoption. We are not to be jealous or make judgmental comments that might hurt someone. It is all for the purpose in God's wisdom and love. I was now ready to return to Earth in the knowledge that my miscarried daughter was happy, loved, and cared for, and that my arms would not be empty, but again filled with God's children from on high. 18 months after recovering from my near-death experience, I gave birth to a beautiful light-haired son. We named him Wesley. When he was 4 years old, he looked exactly like the young child I met in heaven.
Frank, a despairing mother seeks help. Frank Baranowski learned of our research when he attended the first meeting of our local chapter of International Association of Near-Death Studies. Frank became interested in our work and invited us several times onto his Phoenix radio show on KTAR-AM, The Mysteries Around Us. We developed a strong friendship, often receiving phone calls from Frank inviting us to dinner, to speak to his class at Glendale Community College in Arizona, or just to talk. On one occasion, while we were guests in the studio doing his 2-hour radio show, Frank surprised us by playing a pre-recorded tape relating an experience he had as a hypnotherapist.
One day, I received a phone call from Elaine, a despairing mother seeking help for her 6-year-old daughter, Anne. Anne had been taken to various therapists but could not overcome her obsessive and phobic fear of fire. Since no one could identify a time in Anne's life when she had been exposed to fire, the cause of her terrifying thoughts and nightmares was a mystery. I rarely worked with children, but I accepted this case out of intrigue and compassion for the mother's pleadings. Anxiously, almost afraid to hope, Elaine brought Anne to me at the appointed hour. I spoke with Anne, putting her at ease, explaining what I was going to do and how it could help. Trust established, I proceeded to relax Anne into a hypnotic state. With regression techniques, I directed her to explore different stages of her short life. Eventually, her memory went far back and she announced she was happy inside Mommy's tummy. However, contentment soon turned to fear. "Someone's trying to rip me out of Mommy's tummy. Please don't." The 6-year-old burst into tears and pulled into a self-protective fetal ball. But her efforts to find safe hiding were futile. Now terrorized, she cried, "They've got me! They're tearing me out of Mommy!" Dread escalated to horror as Anne screamed, "Please no, not the fire!" In writhing agony, she described her tiny fetal body being thrown into and consumed by a raging bonfire on a beach. Elaine and I were stunned. I quickly calmed and comforted Anne, then counseled her back to a fully conscious state. She was now crying softly, as was her mother, who rocked and stroked her daughter. I assumed Elaine's tears were tears of sympathy, but there was more. At last Elaine spoke. How could she remember? How could she know? I've never told anyone of that night. When I was in college, I dated a young man. We became very close, and I conceived a child. I didn't know what to do. I told my boyfriend, hoping for his support, but he was angry, very angry. He insisted I abort the child. I refused. For days, the father would ignore me. Then he'd return to demand an abortion. His behavior recycled for some time, ignoring, demanding. I told no one of my condition. When I was several months along and had bonded with my now active child, but still not showing much, the father had an apparent change of heart. He was sweet and kind, as he'd been earlier in our relationship. He came by daily to check on me. I was so relieved that my child would be accepted by a loving father. One day, he invited me to a beach party with some friends. I trusted and went. We arrived to the night glow of a large bonfire, dancing shadows along the beach. Approaching the group, I hesitated. This party was different. I was the only girl. Before I could run, my kind boyfriend, the father of our child, turned again and ordered me to have an abortion. His drinking buddies all glared at me in the firelight. I was really scared, but managed to shake my head. No! Immediately, the guys surrounded me in an obviously prearranged plan, courage emboldened for the deed by kegs of beer. While my boyfriend stood at the ready, his buddies grabbed me, stripped my clothing, and pushed my back to the sandy beach. He approached with an elongated coat hanger, sheep-hooked at the end. My screams only increased the mob frenzy. A tiny, bloody body was raked from my insides. I could only watch in crippled horror as my innocent child was thrown into the raging fire. A stench of burning flesh welled up into the salty night air. The man I had loved and thought loved me coldly turned his back, his only act of decency, as I struggled to cover my exposed body with torn clothing. I was too ashamed to request help or even look at the young man. Semi-clothed, I stumbled up the beach and into the car, which I was threatened not to mess up, driven back to my apartment, and dumped at the curb. Over the weeks, I managed to recover physically without medical help, but emotionally, I was wounded for years, so traumatized that I never told a soul until now. Elaine turned from me to her daughter. "Honey, when I met your father and learned that some men are safe to love, it was a big step in my healing. But the biggest healing came after we married, when my empty heart was again blessed with a child. You. I felt a special closeness to you from the beginning, reminiscent of the child I carried years before. Your father and I rejoiced at your birth, your first steps. Soon after you spoke your first words came your fear of fire and the nightmares. As you grew and your trauma worsened, we took you to doctors and therapists and priests. I had so repressed my own trauma of that terrible night that I never thought of that fire. But it was you. You were there. Only after I found a husband and father worthy of you did God send you to me again. I love you, sweetheart."
Later, Frank happily reported that this mother-daughter experience was sufficiently healing that the daughter's fear of fire ceased. Karen, what happened to this innocent child? We invited Karen to live with our family during a difficult time in her teen years. She became friends with our daughters and dear to our entire family. Eventually, she moved back with her family, then married and moved away. We lost track of her for several years. When we met up again, she had 3 children of her own. She was familiar with the books we had written and shared with us the following experience.
I knew something was wrong early. This was my 3rd pregnancy, and I'd never been kicked like this. I had to lie in a certain position to get him to stop. If I shifted to a position he didn't like, he kicked up a storm. Even before birth, he seemed agitated all the time. Blake was born at 12:30 in the morning. At 3 a.m., they took him to the nursery so I could get some rest. At 5 a.m., they brought him back because he would not stop screaming. They tried all the things that normally calm a baby. None had worked, and he had all the babies in the nursery upset. All through babyhood, Blake didn't just cry, he screamed unless I was holding him. The first 3 months, the only way he would sleep was lying on my tummy. Occasionally, when he was finally asleep, I'd gently sneak him to the bassinet. But before long, he'd startle awake and scream in absolute terror. That is the only way I can describe it. There was terror in his expression, in his voice. This persisted for several years. As he grew, I tried to put him in the nursery at church and at preschool. He constantly disturbed and upset other children. He seemed terribly angry, and I was afraid he would really hurt someone. When he did hurt someone, he seemed to have no remorse. My other children were nothing like this. I worried and worried what was wrong. What happened to this innocent child? When Blake was 3 years, 11 months, he said something that startled me. His tested IQ is over 130, in the gifted range, so he can be quite articulate for his age. I was driving on the freeway, and from his car seat, he said, "Mommy, I didn't like being with that other family. They yelled a lot and were mean. I was scared. It really hurt a lot when they lobbed me out at the doctor place. Then I got to come and be with you. This family is nicer. They don't yell so much. I like it better here." That's all he would say.
Little girl, they took me out of your tummy. One of the few other researchers in pre-birth studies, Dr. Elizabeth Carman, co-author with her husband of The Cosmic Cradle, graciously emailed me the following account and gave me permission to include it here.
A little girl was sitting on the kitchen floor playing with her doll while her mom prepared dinner. Out of the blue, the little girl looked up at her mom and said, "Mom, remember when I was in your tummy, but you were too young to have me, and so you went to this place and they took me out of your tummy?" Mom nearly dropped what she was holding because her teenage abortion was a major family secret that certainly was not shared with her daughter. A few minutes later, the little girl looked back up to her mom with a big smile and said, "I am so glad I could come back again to be your little girl."
Barbara, if she had kept me. Years ago, we did a 3-hour radio show that was broadcast to various markets worldwide. During the show, we gave out our phone number and later received over 100 phone calls from individuals inquiring about our research and sharing personal stories of their own. One was from a woman named Barbara who arranged to meet us in person. She related the following.
To this day, one of the great sorrows of my life has been my relationship with my mother. As far back as I can remember, she was abusive to me, physically and emotionally. She would scream in my face, "I should have aborted you." When I was born, she wanted a boy. I always knew she hated me. My dad was a nice guy, but he would just look away when Mom was mean to me. I think he was afraid of my mother. My only protector was my mother's mother. Those two were polar opposites. My grandmother was as kind as my mother was mean. It was a blessing in disguise that we were so poor during the first 5 or 6 years of my life that we had to live with my grandparents. Dad was gone a lot, looking for work or traveling as a salesman. When Grandma would hear Mom yelling at me and beating on me, she'd rush downstairs and snatch me away. She'd scoop me in her arms and hold me close while stroking my hair, saying, "Oh, honey, your mummy," she was English, "is so mean to you. Come to Grandma. You should have been my little girl." She would carry me upstairs into the only world of safety and love I knew as a child. I've never forgotten the time she took me on a trip to Pittsburgh. It would be many years before I understood the full significance of her love for me. Meanwhile, I grew older and we got our own place and spent less and less time with the grandparents. In the pattern of many abused kids, I wanted out as soon as possible. So I leaped desperately and impulsively into 2 abusive marriages, one after the other. By age 32, I was in pretty bad shape and went to see Grandma. As expected, she was both loving and nurturing, which I needed ever so much. But then her words surprised me. "With all you've been through, why haven't you taken your life?" When Ethel, her sister, was 32, she committed suicide. How I miss her. It was the Great Depression, and there was no money to buy food for her kids, and she just couldn't take the stress any longer. You're the same age she was then, and you've had it rough. How is it you are so strong? I'm not sure, Grandma, but I never felt ending my life was an option. She continued, "There's something I've never told anyone. The Depression got me too. There was no food, no money, no jobs, and the bread lines were long and unreliable. In those circumstances, I found myself pregnant. I simply could not bring a child into that kind of world to starve. I struggled with it, but by the 4th month, I locked myself in the bathroom and I aborted my own baby. It was a girl. Honey, I think it should have been you. I was never able to have another child. I'm so sorry. Grandma is gone now. I forgave her on the spot that day. I can only dream what my life would have been like if she had kept me. I look forward with all my heart to being with her in heaven someday. In the meantime, Mom continues to harass me every chance she gets."
Linda, Susan never felt she belonged. One day I received an emotional phone call from Linda, who told me about her sister, Susan. The call came during an especially challenging time when we were writing The Castaways. I was tempted to give up on the book, but Susan's story filled me with the determination to carry on and finish.
One night, shortly after my sister Susan's death, I dreamed of her. In the dream, she was so real, I felt I could reach out and touch her. She was radiant and more at peace than ever I had seen her during her lifetime. Susan conveyed to me that she now understood the confusion and sadness that had plagued her in mortality. She asked me to compile her story and then give it to Sarah Hinze, who will know what to do with it. In the dream, Susan thanked me, and the dream ended. I awakened completely convinced that Susan had given me her unfinished work to do. Her story must be told. I knew it would take time to put all of the pieces together, but I knew it was what she wanted. A few years before Susan died, she confided to me that as a child, she had reoccurring sensations of being born into the wrong family. Often, she felt out of place, lonely, with no understanding as to why. Even her name seemed wrong. To honor and protect my sister, I will not share the name our parents gave her. Susan is the name she believed she should have carried here. Susan described childhood days when home alone while Mom worked, when anxieties would overwhelm her. For reasons she could not explain, she feared no one would return for her. Her fears continued so strongly into adulthood they affected her health. For years, she was often so sick she didn't even have the strength to get out of bed. After years of this, Susan prayed more intently than ever for relief regarding her emotional and physical afflictions. Within weeks of those prayers, there occurred 2 key events. First, our father came to visit me at my home. He shared one of his childhood memories with me. About age 4, he was impressed that a little sister wanted to join the family. The feeling grew until he told his mother that a little sister would soon be born into their family. "I know she is coming," he concluded. This was not welcome news to his worn-down, discouraged mother. She rejected his silly idea. She had determined never to bear another child. Father's gaze was distant. I don't know what happened to my sister. Perhaps it was childish imagination, but it seemed so real that I've never stopped wondering about her. Witnessing the sincerity in my father's countenance, I, too, felt it was true. He should have a younger sister. A second piece of the puzzle came later that same week. My mother stopped by with another family secret she presumably had learned from her mother-in-law, but unknown to my father. When my father was a little boy, his mother, our grandma, had in fact found herself pregnant against her desires. Before her pregnancy showed, and in keeping with her promise never to bear another child, she made plans to go to the nearby city for a few days. She insisted on traveling alone. When she came home, she was no longer pregnant. Wherever she went during that week, Grandma had secretly aborted her child. Shortly thereafter, I went to visit Susan, unaware of my bedridden sister's recent, fervent prayers. Susan was very interested as I shared stories from our divorced parents. She knew her prayers were being answered. She felt sure she was the sister her father had sensed at age 4. Her heart felt the truth of it. She had tried to come, but Grandma could not handle the burden. She, Susan, had been aborted and reassigned birth in the next generation. Susan went into mourning. For weeks, this middle-aged woman grieved for her own rejected little self of more than 50 years earlier, and for the grandmother who should have been her mother. She now understood her lifelong affinity for Grandma. One day, Susan asked me to take her to Grandma's grave. Frail though she was, she insisted on making her way alone to the site. In conversation, Susan was normally stoic, a listener, a comfort to others. When I returned this day, she sobbed in ways I had never seen. Our roles reversed. I listened as she poured out sorrows pent up for decades. These episodes endured about a year, near of the end of which Susan reported a harrowing flashback, a pre-birth memory. She saw herself in heaven, watching our grandmother having the abortion performed. Susan, as a pre-born spirit, screamed, "Stop! Stop! You have no idea what you are doing. Please stop. You can't do this." Her intended mother did not hear, nor did she stop. In disbelief, Susan watched her forming little body wantonly torn out of her mother, put in a trash bag, and thrown into the dumpster. Susan wrote her experience in a journal, providing insight into the feelings of the aborted ones. I read it after her death. Key words included fear, abandonment, aloneness, grief, and most painful of all, rejection. Strangely, there was also guilt. Somehow she felt responsible. If only she'd been better. Next came jealousy. Jealousy for others who had never been through this kind of trauma. And finally there was anger. Anger that she had to come a second time. She hated her true mother for having her killed, and for creating a lifetime of fear that it could happen again. Strong words, but that's what she wrote. It reminded me of something in the Bible about mothers who would kill their own daughters in the last days. Susan suffered more than the rest of us. She once wrote of an exceptionally scary childhood day when she had been left alone. She watched a frightening movie, leading to terror that somebody was coming to force her into a big black coffin and carry her away into the sky. All her life she experienced such fears, along with a dread of rejection. She never felt she belonged. Susan believed that tendencies to do certain things, such as alcoholism or abortion, could be handed down from generation to generation. If negative tendencies are not eliminated from a family line, they can continue and even get worse, causing pain and injury for generations. Learning the truth that she was aborted caused Susan much sorrow, but it also opened her spirit to the pain of her ancestors. For example, one day she was watching a television documentary on the Scottish people, our progenitors. Suddenly she felt the pain of abortion participants in her family line, both victims and perpetrators. Thus, Susan's healing process included not only grief of her personal loss and for Grandma's loss, but also for all those in her family line afflicted by the tradition of abortion. She prayed that all might receive the balm of forgiveness. Over time, Susan did forgive. Truth can be hard, but with it comes understanding. Truth became her ally. Susan released her pain and fear and was finally able to forgive and heal emotionally. She also healed physically. She enjoyed better health the last 4 years of her life than ever before. When it was her time to go, although the physical illness returned, the fear did not. There was contentment about her that I'd never seen. It endured through her last breath. Truly she had overcome and returned to heaven in peace. After Susan's death, a brother who then knew nothing of what I have told handed me a written account of a dream vision. Not many days after her passing, he saw Susan in heaven with our paternal grandmother. Puzzled, but pleased, he said, they were standing together, both radiant, and Susan and Grandma looked astonishingly alike, like sisters. The circle was complete. Through the power of forgiveness, Susan not only passed her greatest test, thus healing herself to return to heaven, but she also opened the way for Grandma to heal from the wrong she had done so they could be reunited as a family. When writing this story, quiet thoughts touched my soul, confirming that Susan's lifelong wish to be reunited with her true mother was achieved. It was now so sweet. I didn't cry much when Susan died. She suffered so on this earth that returning to heaven was surely a relief. But what comfort when my brother brought the news he'd seen her there with Grandma. At last, I understand why Susan often lamented. I just don't feel Grandma around. I can't feel her. Well, now she does.
Jimmy, Mommy, God sent me to you twice. I am grateful to PMH Atwater, who told me this story at an annual conference of the International Association of Near-Death Studies.
Jimmy was only 6 years old when he startled his mother one day. He stopped playing for a moment, looked up at her and said, "Mommy, God sent me to you twice. The first time my body ended up in a jar. It just came out of the blue. She had never told a soul about her abortion."
Kathleen, I know God is very forgiving. One day I received a phone call from a young woman named Kathleen. She had read one of my books and was eager to talk to me. Kathleen felt strongly that she might be a castaway. Since that phone call, I have met Kathleen and her mother and have had ongoing discussions with them concerning their experiences. Here is Kathleen's story.
When my mother was pregnant with me, she had a dream where my form stretched out in her skin. She could see that I was in pain and troubled, and she held me in her arms and comforted me. Because of this dream, she feared that something was physically wrong with me. She soon realized that the dream did not mean that anything was physically wrong, but rather emotionally. I remember being a little girl and being terrified to go to sleep because I had awful night terrors. I would dream about snakes being all around me, and I was terrified that they would touch me. I would wake up and see snakes slithering all around me in the air. I was also convinced that there were evil spirits all around me, and would scream for my mom. I was extremely fortunate because my mom seemed to always rescue me. As I grew up, the fear of snakes and evil spirits continued. Even as an adult, I had panic attacks about snakes, even rubber snakes, and pictures of snakes. In college, and then as a married woman, I was afraid to be home alone in the dark at bedtime. I was afraid that evil spirits could somehow get me if I was alone and in the dark. My fears never made sense, though,
because I had never had a traumatic experience with either snakes or evil spirits. Besides those two fears, I was extremely anxious and always worried that people did not like me or want to be with me. I felt like I was not good enough to be liked or loved. These feelings did not make sense, though, because my parents loved me so much and were so proud of me. They treated me like I was the best at everything, even though I certainly wasn't. They had so much faith in my abilities to do anything. Family members, classmates, friends, and teachers were usually very nice to me also. So it just didn't make sense why I had these feelings. My mom often asked me if someone had hurt me or sexually abused me because my behavior screamed that something was emotionally wrong with me, but I never had been and said so. I had periods of anxiety over these things, and then other times when I felt confident in myself and my abilities. In 2006, I was having a couple of weeks in which I was feeling really down about myself and feeling like I was not good enough. It was then that I received an early Christmas gift from my older brother, a book called Songs of the Morning Stars by Sarah Hinze. My brother and I haven't really felt very close throughout our lives, and he had been praying to find a book that would bring us closer. I was about to put it on the shelf to collect dust like most of the books that are given to me, when I opened the book up to the center and read one of the stories. I was completely drawn into the book and felt the Spirit of God very strongly as I read it. The stories struck a very strong chord with me. I started to wonder if I had been an aborted baby. It seemed to me that this book was God's way of comforting me and helping me understand my many fears and anxieties. I called my mom and told her about the book, and asked her if she thought that I had been aborted. She did not know but said that she would pray about it. My mom is a very strong, spiritual woman. As she pondered and prayed about this specific question, she could see in her mind a friend of hers that was pregnant with me. She saw that this person would get drunk while I was in her womb. While she was intoxicated, evil spirits in the form of snakes would enter her body and swim around me and terrify me. My mom was taught by the Spirit that when people are intoxicated with alcohol and drugs, evil spirits can enter their bodies. My mom was perplexed by this particular friend having a pregnancy end in abortion. She talked to her friend's sister, who confirmed that she had in fact had an abortion when she was a teenager. She had gotten pregnant with a married man, and he insisted she have an abortion. Very few people knew about the abortion, and certainly not my mom or me. My mom called me and very hesitantly told me what she had learned. She was very worried that it would make me feel sad and rejected. It was the opposite, though. It brought me so much healing, knowing why I had felt so much rejection and had so many fears. I felt immensely blessed to have been reassigned to my mom and dad, Eileen and Jim Lentz, who loved me unconditionally and wanted me. I believed everything my mom told me, and it felt so right, but I wanted to see for myself what she saw. I prayed to be able to see what she saw. The answer was, no, you can't handle the trauma again. I felt so loved by God's answer that He was protecting me and shielding me from feeling more pain from it. Instead, God has given me some choice experiences to help me feel His love through all of this and help me know how much encouragement and love I received before getting my second chance at life. I do not hold any contempt or ill feelings towards the person that had aborted me. In fact, when I first found out that it was her, I only felt love for her. I have always loved her and always felt close to her. I forgive her and know that she was in a difficult time in her life. I know God is very forgiving and still loves her too. It has been over 6 years since I learned that I had been an aborted one. I have been quite secretive of my own story because of the fear of being rejected by others. Then one day, the Bible story of Esther really impressed upon my mind. She did not share her Jewish identity until God deemed it the appropriate time. I knew the Lord wanted me to help save the unborn, but I always felt the Lord restraining me in sharing my story until the time was right. Then on my 34th birthday, I felt that the road had been prepared and felt an overwhelming encouragement from God that it was time for me to share my story with my identity and not fear. Like Esther needed to be brave to save her people, I knew the Lord needed me and many others to be brave to help save my people, the aborted ones.
Lonnie, our daughter had been cast away by abortion. One of the great privileges of my work is that I frequently have the opportunity to meet great people with astonishing stories. I first met Lonnie through email, then by phone, and finally in person when I spoke at a conference she attended. She is a remarkable young mother who now has 5 beautiful children. At the time she wrote the following, she had only 4 children. The youngest daughter she refers to is now her second youngest daughter.
In 2010, when I was pregnant with my 4th child, a daughter, something led me to the website of Sarah Hinze. I felt very drawn to Sarah, who has done extensive research into pre-birth experiences. I found her data on contact with preborn souls fascinating. I even felt like God wanted me to connect with her. At the time, I didn't know why. Simultaneously, I was experiencing for the first time antepartum depression. I had never before been depressed during a pregnancy. I couldn't figure out why I felt so much darkness and misery. It seemed so strange after 3 previous happy pregnancies. I got through the pregnancy and delivered my baby. When she was 11 months old, I had a striking and memorable dream. Occasionally, God speaks to me in dreams. I feel that this was one of those divine messages. Here's what I saw. I was walking with someone, I don't know who. We were the only people walking down a deserted road. We were enveloped in an eerie, discomforting darkness. I saw something across the dirt road. I crossed over and picked it up. At first, I could not tell what it was. It seemed to transform in my hand. It was a baby, a tiny baby, only an inch or 2 or 3, so small it fit in the palm of my hand, and it was alive. My immediate thought was, we have to find her parents. I held her and began searching. As I searched, she grew miraculously, in the space of a few hours, to be 5 or 6 years old, a sweet little blonde girl. I took care of her while looking for her parents. I felt my heart ache and fill with love for her. Part of me really wanted to keep her, but another part of me thought, I can't take care of another kid right now. Finally, realizing that our search was futile, we brought her to a nondescript building. There was a massive line of children coming from the door. I got the impression that all those children were like her. They were waiting in line because they had nowhere to go. We headed to the back of the line to leave her there, but my heart was torn and breaking. I wanted to keep her, but I also didn't feel like I could. Then the dream ended. My interpretation was that the little girl in my dream was a special spirit who had been aborted. She was hurting, and she desperately wanted to come to Earth, to be wanted and loved. I felt that I had been chosen to rescue her because I have the compassion and experience to know how to nurture a soul acquainted with abandonment. I felt that she would be bringing some of that heartache with her to Earth, and that I had the means within me to help her heal. I thought this spirit sister was still waiting to come to my family, that she was a child I had not yet brought to Earth. I also felt that God was calling me to help rescue all the other children like her, aborted castaways waiting for their turn on Earth. When I told my husband about the dream and my interpretation, his response was, maybe it's just telling us where our youngest daughter came from. At the time, I didn't want to accept that possibility. A little over a year later, through a series of divinely orchestrated events, I finally met and became dear friends with Sarah Hinze. I devoured several of Sarah's books and developed a special connection with her. Over the past several decades, Sarah has gathered many accounts about the spirits of aborted babies returning to Earth. We began working together with a mutual desire to raise awareness about castaways, like the little girl in my dream, and countless others. For example, in one of Sarah's cases, a mother experienced feelings similar to mine. In both of our pregnancies, we learned that our sad feelings and depression came from our babies within, that each of these little souls had been in another tiny body, had been aborted, and then reassigned to us as their new mothers. In trying again to be born, they still carried the fears, rejection, and sadness of not being loved or wanted. They feared they were of no value and that they might be destroyed again. These babies in womb passed on their traumatic feelings from past abortions to us, their new mothers. As I pondered these cases, I realized my husband's interpretation of my dream was most probable, that it was about our youngest child. You see, our youngest daughter had grown into a very clingy toddler who cried excessively. Although I had always gone out of my way to help her feel safe, loved, and secure, she still seemed to have a constant mistrust of my permanence in her life. Constantly afraid to let me out of her sight, she was restless, doubtful, anxious, and often seemed unhappy. I was exhausted and at my wits' end, wondering what I had done wrong with her. All she had known all her life with me was love, safety, and compassion. So why was she so miserable? Finally, I asked God. I got on my knees and asked if my youngest daughter was the little girl from my dream. Almost immediately, it was like hundreds of little puzzle pieces clicked into place in my head, and a tidal wave of intense anguish swept over me. I gasped and began sobbing with a strong impression that the pain I was feeling actually belonged to my daughter. I believe I was given a small taste of the distress of her festering premortal wounds from having been aborted. I sobbed and sobbed, bathed in her agony, along with my own guilt for having been so blind to her wounds and so resentful of her neediness. I was given divine confirmation of the impressions I had received. Our daughter was the little girl from my dream. She had been cast away by abortion. My heart was broken for her. Thus, my reassigned daughter spent much of her toddler years in a state of distress, anger, sadness, and angst. With my new understanding, I felt more compelled than ever to help her heal. In June of 2013, I attended a meditation retreat taught by my friend Felice. Among other things, I learned a beautiful healing meditation. Upon returning home, I prayed and meditated every morning for 40 days to heal my daughter from her abortion wounds. On one of those mornings, we had a powerful conversation. It started when my daughter, now age 3, said, "I was in your belly." "Yes, you were," I responded with a smile. "Did you like it in my belly?" "No." Moments passed. I was sad. "When were you sad?" I questioned. "In your belly," she said. It seemed that my efforts to help her heal were enabling her to give voice to her difficult womb experiences. Gradually, as I continued to pray and meditate for her, a transformation took place. Her energy shifted until she was quite literally a new child. Relatives and friends were amazed at her changes. She began speaking in sentences, blossomed socially, bonded with her father, and even became chatty. She was free and at peace, and now she soars. What a privilege to have been chosen to bear this reassigned daughter of God, to love her, and to play a small part in helping her heal. I pray her experience and mine will aid others in their own paths to helping and healing.
Ned's story, Chapter 2, illustrates that not every aborted child returns. When Ned better understood God's plan, he had a change of heart. He said losing the children he rejected was one of the greatest mistakes of his life. Ned was not reassigned the children he had aborted. However, he was blessed with a son who this time he welcomed and treasured.